commandment in the Torah, the foundation of the whole religion, is to, of course, have this basic inherent belief, but that's not the command. The command is to search. God challenges us. Yes, you can prove my existence, and you must prove it. You don't rely on anything that you heard. You yourself have to search and search till your intellect is convinced that God must exist. And Maimonides continues and explains that the definition of understanding God, which we have to clarify before we even begin, that no one is ever trying to understand who is God. It's not possible for human intellect, for any finite, to grasp who is God. But at the same time that we don't know who He is, we have a commandment to learn about Him. Not who He is, but many things about Him. And that's what we can search, and we must search to study and be convinced about many things that God has. And of course, none of that is a description of who He is, but about Him. And Maimonides begins by saying that a person can understand and prove that God has to exist, and that He is a being that is not a creation. No one made Him, no one invented Him, but God's existence must be. He exists from Himself, and everything else besides God only exists because God creates it. Nothing has an independence on its own. In order for it to exist, God had to create it. And God is not dependent if He creates or if He doesn't create. If there is no world, He's still the same God. However, everything else besides God needed to be created, and it was God, with His will, with His choice, creates the world every second. And therefore, the definition of what we can search and understand and be convinced is that God must exist. There has to be a God, and the definition of God, the way we understand it now, is that there has to be a being that exists because He has to exist, and everything else besides He Himself is only existing because God chooses to create it and keep it into existence. So when we talk about this world, we talk about the planets, and we talk about heaven. No matter what we talk about, we always have to remember that God is the one who created it, and therefore must create it, as we'll soon explain. He must create it constantly, or else it will return to its original state. And that state was, it wasn't existing. Basic Jewish knowledge, the first sentence in the Torah, the first 3 words of the Torah begins, in the beginning God created. In Hebrew it's Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning God created. And everything lies in those 3 words. That the world was created, as Nachmanides points out, that in Hebrew, when the word bara is mentioned, bara means not that God formed, developed a world, but God created the world, which means that there was nothing whatsoever before God created the world. And God, when He created the world, when He willed to create the world, created the world that we have now. Based on that teaching, that the world was created, then the same thing that we say, that at the first second of creation, He needed to create it, because it had no existence, it could not create itself. Based on that information, there is no difference between the first moment of creation or every day, every second, God has to create the world and bringing it into existence, because on its own it's a non-existence. And therefore, God is actively involved in every creation that exists, even in rocks, even in things that don't seem like it moves and has life. Every creation needs God to create it. And if God would remove Himself for 1 second from the creation, it'll return to its original state of non-existence. And this is what Maimonides says when he says that every creation is dependent on He and on God, and God is not dependent on anything. So this is included in this concept that the world cannot exist on its own. The understanding is that God is not just the life force of the world, but God is really the existence of the world. The world has no identity of its own. And saying that God is keeping the world up, there is no world without God. Nothing exists on its own, not just nothing lives on its own. God is the real existence of everything. And here we come to the second commandment in the order of the foundation of Jewish law. And that is, there is a second command. And as we state this every day in our prayers in the morning and in the evening, the most important sentence in the Jewish religion. And this sentence is, "Hear Israel," speaking to ourselves. Shema Yisrael, hear Israel. God is our God, and God is one. When we say God is one, we are speaking now about step number 2. Once we have the commandment to believe in God, as we stated earlier, now we have a second commandment to take this a step further, that the God that you believe in is the only existence, period. In other words, acknowledging that this world definitely exists. Everything that we see, the heaven and the earth and every creation, it definitely exists. But what is its real existence? It's only God. And that is what Hashem Echad, God is one, means. Not only there's only one God, or not only there's only one life force, but Hashem Echad really means He's the only existence. And that is a special mitzvah